want to do is just center ourselves and just put ourselves in the presence of the Lord this evening. If you could just allow yourself to just be still inside, hopefully still in your heart. This allows you the opportunity for a greater enhancement of your ability to just take in this evening, and the subject we'll be talking about with Catholic social teaching. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing us together this beautiful Saturday evening. We thank you for the weather you've blessed us with literally the last couple of weeks. It's been awesome and beautiful. In that weather, we can see obviously the hands of your creation. We can tell that there is a creator in what we look at. The architect of what we see is definitely a person that is beyond all of our imagining. Be with us this evening as we attempt to develop a little understanding of Catholic social teaching, at least in rudimentary form. Hopefully it can take some of what we learn out into the world and affect those that we live with and that live around us. We ask all this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Well, tonight's subject, and for all the subjects between now and the month of May when we conclude for this year, and this is obviously our first, and this is just, it was very beautiful. In my last parish, we did not do this format. Obviously, we had to catechize both our young ones and our adults, but we did, was more the traditional Saturday faith formation every Saturday for young people, and then a certain night of the week, and that changed on a yearly basis, did adult faith formation for adults. But this method here, Come to the Table, is absolutely very beautiful. So it's been fun to witness how this unfolds and unravels. I was impressed by the amount of people that were at Mass tonight. What really impressed me, and I thought it was beautiful, I don't know if you caught this, but maybe you didn't, from an outsider's perspective, at least in the last 4 months. But when we called forth the children for the children's leaders of word, did you see the number of kids? Yes. I mean, literally the church was almost empty after they left. And everyone seemed to come from that corner over there, so I'm not sure what's going on over there. But I thought to myself, the young families must hang out over on that side, but that was absolutely beautiful. So we'll be talking about that very special topic, Catholic social teaching. And the first question is the origin of Catholic social teaching. Now, clearly, it is a subject that comes up a lot in the late 1800s, 1891 to be more specific, with an encyclical written by Pope Leo XIII. And through the course of the 1900s, there have been several social Catholic encyclicals written. But what has been the origin of Catholic social teaching? Does anyone know the answer to that question? We're looking for the origin. It's important today, obviously, to start with the foundation of Catholic social teaching rather than just getting into 1891 with Leo XIII's Rerum Novarum and move from that point forward. We have to develop the origin first to lay a strong foundation, and then we could build our building on top of that foundation. So the origin. Sure, so that was going to be the Catholic social teaching. Early church, people took care of other people. That is correct. That's going to take us back to a certain size of origin, but we need to go back a little bit further than that, to the absolute origin of Catholic social teaching itself. Exactly right. So it's this person right here. This is the origin of Catholic social teaching. It's Jesus Christ. Because when you have Christ in your heart, then it affects those around you. And that becomes the social teaching. It reminds me of this fellow, just in a small way. When I was at a church in St. Teresa in Uniontown, we had remodeled the church there, just as this church here had been remodeled just several years ago. And we were developing the crucifix, a huge cross, as you have here, with the corpus of Christ on it. And it was hand sculpted by a sculptor a wood sculptor down in Johnson City, Tennessee. The company that did the work at that parish down there, they were from Johnson City, Tennessee. And they had this man who worked in their wood shop. And up to that point, he basically would carve ducks and birds and all kind of wildlife. But he never did anything the size of sculpting Christ. And this is how Christ changes you in your heart. And when Christ changes you, and it's always going to be for the better, then you're going to affect those around you, so then you become a social occurrence when you allow Christ to work in your heart. So this fellow was given the task. This company asked him when I commissioned him to do the sanctuary work down at the St. Teresa in Uniontown. This guy was given the job of sculpting Christ. Now at this point, he was kind of a rough guy. He didn't go to Mass. He was the kind of guy that after work every night he would stop off and have himself a few drinks. Usually those few drinks would turn into more drinks, and he usually would come home very late. And then when he got home, he was always in a bad mood. And so whenever the kids would hear Dad pull into the driveway, they always knew there was trouble. They were really scared to see Dad come home, so they would run and hide. Because Dad invariably would come home into the house, and he would start to yell and scream and look for his wife, and he was just kind of a tough guy. Made life very difficult. But then he was given a job of sculpting Christ. He started off with 2,000 linear feet of balsam wood, which is a tad heavier than balsa wood, in order to sculpt this Christ. He worked on Christ for 9 months, 10 hours a day, to make the Christ, which is very close to the Christ that we have here in this church. Is the Christ we have very close to that in the church in Uniontown, except at St. Teresa in Uniontown, we decided to, this was just a call we made on our own, to separate the legs. So here the legs, traditionally, as you always see, are together. There we decided to make the legs separate, using 2 nails to hold Christ on the cross rather than 1. There's a reason for that, and I'll get into that on another session. But anyway, around month 3, when you take a big chunk of wood, if you're sculpting something out of wood, if you're sculpting something out of granite or marble, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be chiseled away in order to get to the thing that you're working on. And around month 4, when Christ started to take shape, and you started to see the legs of Christ and the chest of Christ, it wasn't that distinct and that clear, but you then could begin to see Christ. What happened is he stopping after work, and then he would go straight home. And then around month 5, as he was working on this Christ, he would call his wife up before he would leave for work and would say to his wife, "Do you need anything as I travel home from the store?" She was stunned. She used to call me on the phone and say, "Father Ken, I don't know what's going on, but my husband's having a transformation." In many ways, he's sculpting Christ, he's making Christ, he is becoming Christ himself. Around the 7th month, as he was putting the final touches, the hair, the facial beard, the crown, as he was sculpting all these items onto the Christ himself, he just started to attend church services in his area. And what was amazing, when this company finished making Christ and this entire wall, they built this wall that we eventually put into St. Teresa Church in Uniontown. They built the warehouse in Johnson City, Tennessee. And then they dismantled it, put it in 5 tractor trailers, hauled it up to Uniontown. It took them 3 days to haul all the pieces back in the church and put everything back together. It took them a month to do that. But anyway, when they were putting Christ into the truck to haul Christ to Uniontown, this man literally stayed in a building weeping like a baby, according to his boss, because he didn't want to see Christ leave. He became Christ. And his wife called me up and told me how becoming Christ, making Christ, changed his life and changed their life. And she was really grateful for this transformation that occurred in her husband. You see, when we allow ourselves to become Christ, then we affect those around us. That's the social aspect of the origin of Catholic social teaching. It was about 7 months after this project was complete. I hadn't heard from the wife in 7 months. She was calling me on a regular basis, telling me our husband, as he made Christ, was becoming Christ. She called me up one day. She said, "Father Ken," she said, "I just want to let you know that now when my husband is coming home from work, my kids are back to running away and hiding." I felt really bad. Initially, I felt bad, because before he started to make Christ, he was stopping off at work, having 1 too many drinks, coming home and kind of raising Cain with his family, and his kids were running high and fair. So I thought to myself, well, that didn't last long. I really, really felt bad. And I said to her, what happened? She said, here's what happened, Father Ken. My husband started to go to church services as he was making that Christ. And now he goes to church every night. He finds some church in the area that's having a service, mass service, it doesn't matter. And so every night he wants to take one of the kids to church. And now when they hear Dad pull into the driveway, then they all run and hide because they don't want to go to church. And I said to her, wow, that's really great. And I said to her, I was thinking about it, I said, could you imagine what's going on in their heart? Think about the worry they had when they were hiding from their dad back in the days when he would stop and drink, have one too many, go home and kind of just upset the whole house. That fear in their heart as they hid under the bed or in the closet had to be tremendous, horrible. But now, as they're hiding from their dad, so he can't find them, so they don't wind up going to church, they have to be just giggling inside. You can almost see their stomach going up and down as they're trying to hide from dad. But that is the essence of Catholic social teaching. All human beings were social animals. We interact with other people. You're a social person in the community of Lower Borough, New Kensington. You're a social person in your family. So how you are affects your family. Moms know that. I've always believed growing up that a mother, because my mother did, a mother sets the tempo in a house. And when mom is well and she's feeling good and she's happy, boy, the house runs so smooth. I think only once or twice in my life until my mom got cancer, but growing up, only once or twice my mom had gotten sick and she was in bed. And the whole house changed. It was just a different place. Still a nice house, still beautiful. But the person who brought about this incredible feeling into the house was in bed sick, and it changed everything. That's Christ's social teaching. Because when you have Christ in your heart, you change things. Now, what I would like to do is just spend some time to develop a profile of Christ. This is very important. Psychologists say that every one of us has what is known as a psychological profile. There's 5 or 6 key words, salient points that can be attached to our character that describes who we are and what we are. We all have one of those. Your family knows what your psychological profile is. Christ had a psychological profile. And what we're going to do is just spend a few moments trying to develop the psychological profile of Christ because there's a reason for it. As we're trying to understand the origin of Catholic social teaching, that's the origin. We're all social beings as human beings, and so Christ can affect us. Now we're going to try to determine what is the profile, psychological profile of Christ. So let me just ask, as you sit there, just for several one-word answers you believe really helps to describe who Christ is. Just one word. Peace. Okay. Now we're back. Okay, good at spelling. I got that one. You know, what happened is I said to Donna the other day, I said, Donna, is it possible rather than using, like the big poster board and getting my magic marker and asking for, answers from the people, I have to run up and kind of spell it. Is it possible for us to type it onto the computer thing and put it on the wall? And she made the tragic mistake of saying yes. So now I said to myself, yippee, there's one more thing we can do with this great technology. So peace definitely describes Christ in a small way. Love. Rick? Omnipotent. Try that one. That's your buddy Rick out here. They got you, Rick. Spirituality. Okay, it's Christ in the temple. Compassionate. We're going to go a little bit more because this is going to allow us to really get an impact on Christ's social teaching. So this is going to come into play, each one of these words, to a great extent, not only tonight, but as we travel through each month all the way to May. Forgiving, exactly correct, forgiving. Pardon me? Extrovert, I would say that Christ was an extrovert. Sure, he was out there among the people. I would say that's true. Extrovert, Mr. Crowley. Teacher, no question about it. That's why he was called a rabbi. He was definitely an effective, very effective teacher at a young age. Teacher. Yes? Selfless. It was definitely his gift, his style. And I think one of the great acts of the selfless Christ is the cross. Shows his selfless act. He wasn't selfish. If Christ was selfish, he would not have found himself on that cross. He got himself out of that. And he would have said to the Father, when God asked him, this is what I need you to do, he would have said, no. He did say, would there be another way? But he eventually said yes. Sinless. It's true. Sinless. Sinless. Comforting.
Curious, how do we know he looks exactly like that?
That's a great question. And the answer is, we don't know. So the question is, how do we know Christ looked as the picture we had just a couple seconds ago? How do we know Christ looked like that? And we don't. And I believe that's the beautiful part of Christ being the way he was conceived. Because clearly then, he had the DNA, as we know these things, of a human being through his mother. But his DNA would have been that of God. So I believe in my heart that that allows God to be fluid in look. Because if you go to an African American church, and it's fun to go to different churches, you will see what? A black Christ, as you should, because they're seeing Christ in their image, because the gospel says he is made in the image of us.
Who was the first one to actually paint a portrait of Christ that we see?
I'm not sure who the first one would have been, who painted Christ. Okay, any other words that would describe Christ himself? When you're having trouble at home, or there's a fight going on in your house, or neighbor to neighbor, what kind of things do you think about when it comes to Christ? I'm thinking of one that starts with an M. Merciful. Let's put merciful on the wall. Now, when you look at those peace, love, omnipotence, spirituality, compassion, forgiving, extrovert, teacher, selfless, sinless, comforting, merciful, what you really see are the key components of Catholic social teaching writings and encyclicals. So whenever you read a Catholic social encyclical, you will be reading these words, about these words. They're so important. So let's take a look at a few Catholic social encyclicals. Now, there are a total of, there are many Catholic social encyclicals. The first one occurred in 1891 with Pope Leo XIII, Rerum Novarum. That's a very important social encyclical. That is what most people consider the first. So that's an official writing of a pope about how we should treat each other. So what we got is this. Jesus Christ is the origin of Catholic social teaching. Every person that decided to become Christ and a Christian from that point forward, they had been doing their own style of Catholic social teaching. So in your home as a mother or father, when you are teaching your son, your daughter, the difference between right and wrong, you're teaching your son or daughter how important it is to forgive, how important it is to show their little brother, little sister mercy, how to love, how to be kind, how to be generous, how to be compassionate. What are you doing, mom and dad, in your home? You are doing Catholic social teaching. Because you're teaching socially your kids, and your kids are going to do what? They're going to walk out of the house and they're going to do the exact same thing. They're going to treat people the way you have taught them to treat people. That is Catholic social encyclical. But now we had Pope Leo XIII was the first pope, and there were many popes prior to Pope Leo XIII, 1891, and he was a pope just prior to 1891. But he was the first one to write officially a papal letter, which is called encyclical, talking about Catholic social teaching, And there's going to be a strong reason why he did. Now, that occurred in 1891, Rerum Novarum. It means of new things. Whenever you read a any encyclical by any pope, whether it be a theological encyclical, social encyclical, the first 2 to 3 words in the encyclical itself. Now, you're going to be reading it obviously in English. Social encyclicals always have a Latin title. But the first 2 or 3 words of the encyclical, of the letter that the Pope writes, always is the title of the encyclical itself. So Rerum Novarum, literally translated, means of new things. So he writes that in 1891. The next social encyclical officially was 1931, Pope Pius XI, Quadragesimo Anno, which means 40th year. 40 years after Rerum Novarum, he writes that a social encyclical. So now, going all the way back to 1891, there's a lot of stuff going on that forced Pope Leo XIII to write that encyclical. Now we get to 1931, think back in your American history, or even if you have an understanding of European history or history of the industrialized world, there's a lot of stuff going on in 1931. At that point we have, especially in this country, economic collapse, the Great Depression, people are starving, people are hurting, people without money, without jobs, they are just in dire straits, and we're talking not a few, but the majority. Now that's different than what we have today. We still have people who are starving, let's just say here in Lower Borough, in the Kensington. I could tell by the amount of folks that go to our food bank, which is incredible. We still have folks who are starving, who are hungry, who are without work, who are feeling destitute, but it turns out to be in Lower Borough, New Kensington, that's the minority. The majority are doing fairly well. For the most part, as you're sitting here in church, you're well dressed, you're fed, you go to a home, whatever style it is, but you go to sleep tonight clean and full, and hopefully I think the most important way to go to sleep is to know you're loved. And love is part of Catholic social teaching. So when you're crawling in bed tonight, you say to yourself, I am loved. I have a great wife. I have a great husband. I got a great family. Even your extended family. They're not in the same home with you tonight because they're living out of locales, but you can feel that you're loved. That's Catholic social teaching. That's what's going on in 1931. Again, the world is experiencing difficulties. Mater et Magistra, mother and teacher, Pope John XXIII, 1961. What's going on in 1961? At that point, we have the development of the Cold War. We have on the bridge, or on the start of the bridge of 1961, the Cuban Missile Crisis. So there's a lot of threats going on in the world that, as people viewed it back then, that could destroy the world as people were experiencing back then. The next one, Pacem in Terris, peace on earth, John XXIII, 1963. At that point, this is the same year, obviously, President Kennedy was assassinated. But at that point, the Cuban Missile Crisis has, when this encyclical, so to speak, was given to the public, had already occurred and had already been solved. But for those who lived through it, I did, but I was just a little tight. So I could just go on what I hear my parents and my uncles talk about, and my aunts and people. The Cuban Missile Crisis, especially when you read about it, it was a pretty scary time. Those couple of days would have looked like, yikes, this whole thing could just literally just blow apart. So Peace on Earth by John XXIII, what he's talking about is this. He's using the profile of Christ. You see, that's important. He's talking about love and compassion and mercy and forgiveness and all those profiles of Christ. He's putting that into the encyclical, telling people, hey, look, stop, think about what you're doing here. So when a Pope writes an encyclical, he's not coming out with new terms and new definitions, coming out with something no one else has ever thought about. He's using the profile of Christ to get people to understand, hey, look what happens when you can't find a way to forgive. Well, that's so important. They say that forgiveness is the gift that you give to yourself. And when you look at the different wars, okay, by the time we're not 1891, but the First World War, which is in the late 1900s, 1916 or 17, 18, and 19, that was already occurring. By the time you get to 1931, Hitler's already, we're not in the Second World War yet, but Hitler is beginning his methodical advances early on in a slow strategic way through Eastern Europe. Darkness is already coming over the world as he's attempting to mount this incredible blitzkrieg style of approach in war. The popes could see what was going on. That's why they wrote those encyclicals. Now, before we get to the remaining ones, what's really important when a pope writes an encyclical? That's great. But what needs to occur once he writes it and he gets it out into the world? Well, what has to happen then? Change, but just before you change, this is so important, guys. The same thing happens in the Bible. When the Pope wrote Rerum Novarum, Quadragesimo Anno, Mater Magistra, Pacem in Terris, and let's just take a look at Gaudium et Spes, 1965. This is near the conclusion now of Vatican II. It means hope and joy. And Octogesimo Evenius, the 80th anniversary. 80th anniversary of what? 80th anniversary of the first Catholic social encyclical, 1891. The social encyclical, we're going to be covering this Rerum Novarum in a real heavy way as we move through the subsequent months all the way to May. That's the first one. And every Catholic social encyclical, since Rerum Novarum, is built upon Rerum Novarum. And Rerum Novarum is built upon who? Jesus Christ. Now, whenever a pope writes a social encyclical or any encyclical, what must occur in order for change to take place? Someone said over here. You got to read it. You got to read it. So in every one of these social encyclicals, as these popes are writing about, hey, this is what's going on in the world. There's darkness going on in the world. People have lost their way in how to love. They've lost their way how to forgive. They don't understand love. They're missing out on the understanding of Christ's compassion. They're not getting the understanding of Christ's mercy. When you write these social encyclicals and you are warning the world about what is going on, you have to read it. Because if the Pope spends this time writing it, and he puts it out in publication form to people, and no one reads it, is change going to take place? No. The Bible, and it still is, thank God, the Bible is the most sold book of all time. Not in any given week or in any given month, but over the stretch of the long haul, the Bible is the most publicized book of all time. Maybe on some given weeks, some given months, a bestseller can outsell the Bible in that period of time. But a long haul, it's the Bible. But what we have to hope is, although the Bible is the most sold book of all time, that's nice. I'm not sure if anyone has made this statistic, but what hopefully we can say is, not only is the most sold book of all time, it is the most read book of all time. Then we have ourselves something. It's one thing to buy it. It looks nice on the shelf. But if you're not reading it, then what happens? It gets dusty. You know, some years ago I was, I forget what year in my priesthood, but this family invited me to their home for supper. So I said, yeah, like I usually do. And I got there, and they invited me into the house. They invited me into the living room. So I'm just sitting there, and you know, we're just having some chit-chat, and I could smell the food. It sure did smell good. And the wife, or just a husband and wife, they were just a young couple. They hadn't been blessed with any little ones yet. She had excused herself. She went into the kitchen to keep working on the meal so everything would be perfect. They wanted everything perfect. So she's in the kitchen, and I'm out in the living room talking to the husband. And we're just having a nice conversation. And the doorbell rings. So excuses himself and went to answer the door. So I'm just sitting in this living room and just kind of looking around and, you know, just kind of seeing what they had. And I looked over to the left side, and the whole entire left wall of that living room was bookshelves. And there were books in every shelf from left to right. Left to right. I thought to myself, wow, these guys are pretty smart. I better not make anything up here, because these guys seem to know their stuff. At least they got a lot of books. So I'm just looking around and looking to the right, looking to the left, front and behind me. He's talking to someone at the door, and she's working on a meal. And then I looked at the bookshelf, and I noticed right about the third shelf, there's a book missing. There's a book missing. I mean, the shelves were full of books, left to right. Shelf after shelf. Then I look over, and there's a book missing. It's about that wide. I thought, I wonder what book is missing. There's a book missing. The entire bookshelf is full of books, but there's a missing book. And then I looked at the coffee table, and guess what I saw? The Bible, the coffee table. And then I looked at the thickness of the Bible, and I looked at the thickness of the hole, and I said to myself, it fits right there. The Bible fits in that hole. Then I got real disappointed. I got real disappointed. Because here's what initially I thought, and then here's what my thought changed. When I saw the Bible there, I thought, great, well, that's nice. The Bible, despite all those books, the Bible front and center. This is admirable. This is beautiful. I mean, the Bible's right there. And then when I noticed that the Bible came from that spot, I thought to myself, oh, wow. They were just out to fool me. These guys, I don't know if they read the Bible, but the Bible doesn't stay on a coffee table. It is shelved in the dusty bookshelves of that bookshelf. I thought to myself, if I had invited a priest over to my house, if I were a married guy, and I said, hey, Father, come on over and make you a meal, I probably would have did the same thing, but I would have just did one adjustment. I would have taken a book out and slid the rest down. Slid them down. Hey, think about it a little bit. I wanted to tell the guy, good move, pal, but why did you slide them down? Then I would have never known the truth. But since you didn't slide them down and the hole was there, and then the Bible fit in that hole, then I knew the truth. So here's the only way when the popes write these social encyclicals, the only way you can develop social change in the social encyclical, the pope has to write it. And as we travel through, and eventually, maybe some tonight, but as we get into October, November, we're going to be hitting that Rerum Novarum pretty good. And you'll be able to see exactly what the Pope was talking about. If our current Pope, Pope Francis, if he writes a social encyclical, I tell you, get your hands on it right away. And for a lot of reasons. First of all, it's talking about Christ. But his social encyclical, because what a Pope has, he has the eye of an eagle. Because he's got a greater view of the entire world than a local bishop does in a diocese. A local bishop in a diocese clearly knows what's going on in his diocese. He might know what's going on in his state or in his country, but he doesn't have the same style of pulse that the Pope does. Not that the Pope can see all that's going on in the world, but the Pope just has all these incredible advisors, and they're advising him from all locations of the world. The Catholic Church is spread throughout the entire world. They're telling him what's going on. So when he writes a social encyclical, it's going to talk about what is going on, and if the difficult spots of the world aren't rectified, the result of what can happen. And one of the key components when you read a Catholic social encyclical, and it's all through the ones that are on the board there, is the subject of forgiveness. Because armaments, and we have them to protect ourselves, but many of those are used because of the inability of human beings collectively, and many times then individually, to forgive. So we have this incredible military budget, and I'm not here to demote it or promote it, understand it. But all that's based upon the inability of all of us around this big globe of 20,500 miles in diameter, of the inability to forgive. Let's go back to the social encyclicals. 1891, Pope Leo XIII writes his. Jesus Christ is here 2,000 years prior to that. So in a 2,000-year lapse of time, people were doing Catholic social teaching on a small basis. As little ones were being trained by the parents about loving them, being compassionate, being merciful, forgiving. And then they were marrying and they were having their little ones. They were passing on the same that they learned from their parents onto their kids. So that's Catholic social teaching in a small form, but then it affects the entire area around them. What then? I got to ask you. There's no pope from Christ all the way to Leo XIII that writes a social encyclical. What made Pope Leo XIII write his social encyclical? There was something going on in the world that was causing heartache, that was causing pain, that was causing strife. It was making a huge class of poor people and a small class of extremely wealthy people. What was going on prior to, and this is going on decades before 1891, that finally made Pope Leo XIII say, that's it. I have to write a social encyclical, hoping that people will read it and they'll understand what is going on in this world, and hopefully we can correct some serious injustice. Any idea what's going on? Industrial Revolution, that's it. Most of you don't do it. The whole Rare Navarre in 1891, that thing is really talking about the Industrial Revolution. Let's face it. The cotton gin, development of armament and bullets and the making of rifles, all that was part in steel, all that was part of the Industrial Revolution. Naturally, it brings us to where we're at nowadays. But the Industrial Revolution had developed a group of people that never existed prior to that. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, it starts to kick in around 1810, 1820. There are glimpses of the Industrial Revolution. Things are starting to progress that way. Definitely into the Civil War with the amount of military armaments they needed through the Civil War. That really ignited the Industrial Revolution. So you went from a farming industry to an industrial complex. So prior to the Industrial Revolution, people were living off the land. They were farmers. That was an agrarian society. That's when people took care of their neighbors. Everyone was on the same plane. Now I hear people talk about the 1920s and 1930s, living through the Depression, how neighbors took care of neighbors. Ever hear that? People did things for neighbors. Why? Because everyone was in the same boat. Everyone was hurting. Everyone was struggling. No one can get ahead. Since no one can get ahead, you had no problem doing something for your neighbor. People usually don't do things for their neighbor if they believe what I do for my neighbor will allow my neighbor to get ahead. I want him to be stuck here where I'm at. So I'm not going to do anything to make his life better because he might rise above me. So back when we lived in an agrarian society, everyone was in the same plane. Everyone lived off the land. Everyone took care of everyone. Socially, financially, everyone for the most part was on the same level. There were the landowners, the aristocrats, but that number was very, 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 very small. Landowners. The guys, the fat cats, if you want to call it, who had it all. They had all the money, all the land, all the workers. They were living pretty high. Everyone else either took care of the aristocrats, made sure they were well fed and well clothed, and then they worked off the land. That's when people took care of everyone. But when the Industrial Revolution starts kicking in, then you have a whole new class of workers, industrial workers. So now in these foundries, and if you ever watch there's a really neat thing on the History Channel. They call it the Men Who Built America. Has anyone seen that? The Men Who Built America. This is a great thing on the History Channel. In this part of the country, let's face it, for those from Lower Burrell, New Kent, or areas in southwestern Pennsylvania as we understand this. You know what was going on. And talk to your grandparents if they're still alive. But way back in 1891, again, Pope Leo XIII has already written his encyclical, but what happens in 1892 as part of the Industrial Revolution? the folks down at Homestead, the workers there, who are literally working 18, 19 hours a day, 7 days a week, horrible, horrible conditions, where the mule was viewed as having more value than the worker, where the workers, if they got hurt, were basically told to hit the road. If a worker in the Homestead mill died working, the other workers were told just to pick them up. This is history, it's fact. Take them home and put them on a porch. So what happened? As that was going on right here, right on the neck of the woods, as that style of industrial revolution was occurring, because when that started, you still had what? You had your folks, as back in agrarian society, you had the folks who were the aristocrats. There was always a small number. They owned it all. But in industrial revolution, you had the folks who owned it all in terms of the industry. So that would be names that we've heard of before. John D. Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, Andrew Carnegie, Edison, Westinghouse. You had these fellas who owned the industry. These guys were becoming incredibly wealthy. And it was at a cost of whom? They became wealthy on the backs of who? The workers. The workers who didn't have a say. They were just glad to have a job because they needed to do what? These men needed to do what? They needed to feed their families. Any father here, any mother here, when you go to work day after day, you're doing that all for what? When you get married and you have blessed with a couple kids and mom's working hard, dad's working hard, what are you doing all that hard work for? For your kids. So that your family, so you can feed them and house them and clothe them and have perhaps a warm house at night and get ready for wintertime. That's what was going on in the Industrial Revolution. These guys were just happy to have a job. So when they have the strike in Homestead, that strike was started on June the 30th, 1892, is when the workers down at Homestead finally said, that's it. We can't take it anymore. And they were trying to organize so they could strike, hopefully to unionize, which basically means to become one. To unionize is we're going to be together. It's us against, not them, us against him. It really wasn't them. There's usually only one guy at the top. And some of the subordinates who also were kind of the administration, they were making the big money. The rest of them were just, they weren't. So in Homestead, you know, whenever you go down to, like down to Dave & Buster's, it was fun to go to Homestead, right? You go to Dave & Buster's and play the games down there and go over to Costco's. But you see those massive smokestacks. And you drive by those, and right now they become decorations. Now look at this. Look how straight they are. How did those guys build those things? No cranes. Just look at those. They're masterpieces. Then when you're leaving, or depends how you pull into like Dave & Buster's there, but you can see some of the shell of the steel mill over at one side over near Eaton Park there. But when you look at those smokestacks, the next time you're down there, think about the industry, the steel mill that circled those smokestacks. The blood that was shed on the very property that Dave & Buster's, Costco's, all those stores are currently on. Back in 1892, as those workers in that Homestead plant went on strike, and Andrew Carnegie brought in the military police, the Pinkertons, I believe from Chicago, and they went in with bullets, guns, and just started shooting. So men were killed. That's all documented. This is history. Now, that is what brings us to Rerum Novarum. So all that stuff is going on prior to 1891, where the industrial complex is being built up. Our country is being built up, thank God, but unfortunately at the price of the worker. So Pope Leo XIII, this is not in the United States, this industrial revolution is occurring throughout Europe. So then he writes a social encyclical using these key components of Christ: love, owners, compassion, owners, forgiveness, owners of what's going on here. We're just going to show a little clip here. It just takes a couple moments of the Industrial Revolution. So it's a little video. Hopefully it shows up well here in church.
Mechanization began in the textile mills of England, where one machine attached to a spinning wheel could do the work of 50 people. Fuel, clothing, and food all became more affordable. With the development of locomotives and steamboats, manufactured goods could now be sold halfway around the world. Families moved from the villages of their ancestors to new industrial towns. And a new class of people emerged, workers who produced goods. Industrialists, the people who owned the factories, employed hundreds, sometimes thousands of people, and they made enormous profits in their industrial centers. But while the Industrial Revolution brought wealth to some and jobs for others, it came with a price tag. Pollution from coal-powered factories turned the cities black. Lack of housing created the first urban slums. And the demand for more and more goods and higher profits brought the exploitation of workers, including children. Some of the worst conditions were seen in the textile mills of New England. In the 1830s, a 10-year-old little girl described her life.
We were paid $2 a week, and the working hours of all the mills extended from 5 o'clock in the morning till 7 in the evening, with 1/2 hour for breakfast and for dinner.
It was the hiring of children, some as young as 5 years old, throughout the 1800s and early 1900s, that outraged the public. Workers and reformers protested. They formed unions and associations and fought for government regulations to limit the workday and protect children. These laws helped address many of the abuses brought on by the Industrial Revolution. Today, we are in the middle of another revolution, a technological revolution. We live in what's called the global village, because we can connect with people around the world as if they lived next door. And we can now work anytime and anywhere. We will have to wait and see where this new revolution leads.
But what you can clearly see just in that little video brings out the idea of the abuses that the workers experienced during the Industrial Revolution. What I find amazing, especially for all of us being from this part of the country, is this is really, in many ways, to understand Catholic social teaching in these encyclicals, this is really our history. It talked about the pollution. So if you're more my age, I remember traveling with my parents into Pittsburgh, and you'd be on the Parkway East, the side we'd always travel in on, and the steel mills were there on the left side, and you just see those blast furnaces just going. You would hear people talk about how dirty the city was. It made an incredible transformation, but that was part of the Industrial Revolution. Then it also talked about the big word of abuse to the worker. So what I would encourage everyone is we get into approach the month of October, if you'd be good enough to also show technology and that guy's little thing popping off. But fortunately, that doesn't happen anymore. But if you just get online and just click in Rerum Novarum by Pope Leo XIII, and just begin to read a little bit or the entire encyclical, which is there online, or part of it, just excerpts, to try to understand what he was writing, what he was talking about. This is really kind of where we're from. So we all had this in our own backyard. In New Kensington, Alcoa was the big hire over there at one time, employing literally thousands of people. I remember one day I went to, I was a young priest over at Mount St. Peter's in New Kensington, and Alcoa, they were trying to naturally make people buy aluminum. So they were doing two things. They had made aluminum Christmas trees. You might remember these. My aunt had one of those, and if you have one of those, my understanding is you got yourself a real collector's item. So they were made out of aluminum, and then in front of the tree was this revolving light that had different colors on it that changed the color of the tree. So those are really something. But this one day, and it's up near, I don't even know if it's still there, but there were two of them. There were two model homes behind, up from Mont St. Peter, back a piece off of Freeport, I think behind that funeral home, Krupa Funeral Home. These two homes, they were made out of aluminum, okay? And they were model homes. So Alcoa was hoping that people would fall in love with aluminum homes and buy them, and that would become the wave of the future. So I went to this lady's house to give her communion, my first time there, and I looked, and the house the sun was shining, and it just would blind you as you're trying to walk into the house. Just the sun is reflecting off the aluminum, and it was too much. So I got into the house, and everything is aluminum. The floors, the walls, the ceiling. And I was having a nice conversation with a lady. She didn't have any pictures on the walls, and I said to her, you know, you don't have any pictures on the walls. And she said she can't figure out how to hang them. She got a nail, and they won't go through the aluminum. And so she just always lived without pictures. So I said to myself, I didn't have to, but I said to her, can I use your restroom? Because I had checked it. So I went in there, the sink, the medicine cabinet, everything was aluminum. And it was aluminum colored inside of the house. So you hang around that much aluminum and you begin to get nauseous. And I went back and I'm sitting down and I'm talking to say, fortunately the couch was made out of material. So it had, you know, a spring to it. And I remember talking to her, having a really nice conversation, and all of a sudden, I heard a bing, 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 bing. It started to rain. Okay, now she never heard a thing because she lived there. It's like living next to railroad tracks. If you live next to railroad tracks, you don't hear the train. But if you're a visitor visiting someone who lives next to railroad tracks, you can't think. So this lady's having this conversation with me, and all I hear is this rain hitting the aluminum. And I said to her, hey, look, here's communion. I got to go. I'm getting sick. So I stood up, I said, honey, bought a price, a nice job, and I got out of there. And that was all part of, in a small way, at least in our little area, part of the Industrial Revolution, because our country was really booming at that point. There was high employment, and with that, when you read Rerum Novarum, you will read about the downside of such employment. You'll hear about the abuse of workers, no compassion, no mercy given to the workers, just what an incredible life they had to live. And when you think about those workers, I would have to say that probably those very workers they're talking about might not have been your grandparents, but either your great-grandparents or your great-great-grandparents. They're definitely in your bloodline, the workers that Leo XIII writes about, of the injustice that was given to them through the course of the Industrial Revolution. So I was told to end at this time because I guess pretty soon your little ones will be coming up here. And then we'll have our closing prayer. But between now and October, if you'd be good enough just to go into your computer online, read about Rerum Novarum, Pope Leo XIII, 1891, if you could remember that, or just part of it. And what you're reading is not only the history of social teaching, but you might be experiencing part of what someone in your family, an ancestor, went through, and Pope Leo XIII was talking against that style of abuse. Yes, ma'am.
The Roosevelts, you can get it on Xfinity right now, and the second episode is all about the Industrial Revolution and how he went to break it up.
So on the Infinity, if you have that, the show called The Roosevelts. The second segment is on the Industrial Revolution, so might be something you might want to look up. It's really part of who we are. So the social encyclicals, they tie into our bloodline. Okay, thanks guys, and we'll be hopefully back in October, which should be nice. Okay, everyone, thanks guys.